Hello, everybody. I'm Jhn OLoughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's a special reading. And let's see what happened to my video, though. I'm still here. Okay. Saw a little glitch. Sorry. Anyway, let's start over. I'm excited to be reading today from my own book, the only book I've ever written and probably ever will read. It's called will write. It's called McDuff Lives: The Life and Untimely Death of Thomas F. O'Loughlin, Jr. It's available on Amazon. And, I've had a number of very great conversations with people recently about the book, and people are very excited about learning my dad's story. So, in order to just help spread it, I'm going to actually read the book on my show. And, the point is not to sell the book, although please buy it. It helps support the work we do. But the main point is that, as I've been saying since I first wrote the book, if you understand what happened to McDuff, my dad is, we call him McDuff here on the channel, if you see how his life it developed and then devolved as a result of his being of a strong character that would not do the evil things that were uh, placed in front of him, he becomes an iconic figure for how we can face the really hellacious forces that are fighting against our freedom and our humanity as we speak here today in 2024. Pardon me a second. All right, and it's a paperback. Of course, you can also get the Kindle version. Haven't published a hardback yet. Got a couple edits in mind, and I may do a second edition depending upon demand, which I hope becomes great. Okay. Now, here we begin the book with Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, the famous philosopher, the person who, wrote a history of philosophy and the histories of civilization itself, a man who claims to be able to put his arms around everything and describe it to us, but a man who is wedded in the division of people into different classes, different races, etc., a person whose philosophy is tinted by his own, whether he acknowledges it or not, racism and elitism. So here's the quote that I chose to begin the book. On those rare occasions when a boy or girl who has passed the age at which it is usual to determine social status shows such marked ability as to seem the intellectual equal of the rulers, a difficult situation will arise, requiring serious consideration. If the youth is content to abandon his previous associates and to throw in his lot wholeheartedly with the rulers, he may, after suitable tests, be promoted. But if he shows any regrettable solidarity with his previous associates, the rulers will reluctantly conclude that there is nothing to be done with him except to send him to the lethal chamber before his ill-disciplined intelligence has had time to spread revolt. This will be a painful duty to the rulers, but I think they will not shrink from performing it. Unquote. Bertrand Russell from The Scientific Outlook. Sound scientific to you? Ill-disciplined intelligence. I'm all for it, man. And that's what they're afraid of. The ones in George Carlin's big club. So in a nutshell, I think that's the story of my dad's life. I and I'm offering it to you because I think if we take it seriously enough, we'll see that these forces exist, that there is a line which once you cross, you can't go back. And if you disobey, you just get eliminated. That kind of society exists right behind the curtain, and we deny it. So let's bring it to center stage. Let's show exactly what happens when a good person tries to stay on the path of goodness against all these evil forces. The last time I saw my father was sometime in May 1971 at Cafritz Memorial Hospital, now Greater Southeast Community Hospital in Washington, D.C. I was not supposed to be there. Months before, Mama had told us that Daddy was going into the hospital and he was very sick, so bad that he did not want us children to see him. So we were not to see Daddy again. I was finishing my first year of college at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. I was 18 years old, home for a few days, and I could not accept it. Why shouldn't I go see him? He was alone, suffering, and I loved him. More than that, I needed him. So I took the car and went to the hospital, alone, carrying some of his books with me, his poetry anthologies. I thought to read to him, a way to pass some time together before it was too late. But when I arrived, after stealthily slipping past the sign-in desk and walking straight to the elevator, I found his room dark, and he was in the bed, looking at me with a kind of terror in his face, almost panicking, but unable to speak. I boldly ignored his concern and went into the room to his bedside. I would defy his orders and show him I was old enough to see him as he was, sick, emaciated, and in pain. If I had expected praise, I got none. He was unhappy I was there, and I was losing my chance to have a meaningful connection at this crucial moment. I asked him if I could read to him. No. He tried to say, "Go away," voiceless, mouthing it through clenched teeth. I couldn't deny him. I had done my best, and so I left, taking the books with me. I had accepted the fact that all the questions would remain unanswered, all the reasons left unexplained, all our lives thrown into chaos by the sudden onset of cancer. Yet, my questions remained. I knew his work was secret, and he worked for SACSA, a part of the Pentagon, to which he had transferred from the FBI in 1962, not long after my youngest sister was born. And his job was important. He was the highest ranking civilian in the Pentagon, excluding political appointees. So important that he got a coveted parking space with the quote, with the bird kernels, and most coveted of all, a window. But it wasn't just his rank and outward signs of importance. He had heavy burdens to carry. One evening some years earlier, Mama had told us Daddy was starting a very, very difficult project at work, and he would not be able to talk with us after dinner anymore. He would be working late and come home too tired to help us with our homework, which was a great loss to me as I had started taking Latin and he had helped me with it before this new situation. I cherished my time with him, and now he was not to be there for me to answer my nightly petitions for help. Daddy loved languages, and I'm sure he would have enjoyed helping me if times had been different. From then on, Daddy was not much involved with us kids. An exception was his chauffeuring me home after school, high school band practice. 3 days a week, I would stay for band practice at school, and Daddy would be there, waiting for me to drive me home. Often the ride passed in silence, but occasionally he would talk. We listened to WGMS radio, the classical station, and I was starting to learn a bit about Beethoven and other composers. He knew them well, but once I won a bet with him. I heard something that made me think Aaron Copland. He didn't agree, so I bet him 50 cents. He took the bet, and I won. But I didn't like the feeling that he could lose a bet about classical music, a subject that he loved. I never collected the bet. On another occasion, I was depressed, having found it nearly impossible to make friends at the Catholic high school, I was going to, which was far from our neighborhood, dividing me from my contemporaries at home as well as at school. I asked him bluntly, Daddy, are we different from other people? Sphinx like, he offered no answer. Grandpa. My paternal grandfather was Thomas F. O'Loughlin Sr., and he was a huge influence on my life. He seems to have encountered the powers that be early in life, as his marriage to my grandmother, Margaret Lawrence, ended in an early divorce when my father, Tom Jr., was an infant. Born in the late 1890s in Hartford, Connecticut, Grandpa was of age to be drafted in World War I, but never was. Instead, he was sent to Washington, D.C. to attend college at the new Catholic University, graduating in 1919 with a bachelor's degree in law, although his main interests appear to have been football and drinking. Tom and Margaret were married in 1919, and Tom Jr., my father, was born on March the 21st, 1920. Grandpa, or Tom Sr., was being groomed for a place in the Connecticut establishment. However, his rebellious nature was reflected in his apparent failure to pass the bar examination, attributed by Grandma to his addiction to alcohol, which also caused her to leave him and seek a divorce. Grandma's story is tragic. The poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks, unable to obtain justice from the courts, who favored the O'Loughlins, the paternal grandparents, with, quote, high-powered lawyers, unquote. And thus custody of Tom Jr. was awarded to them, the paternal grandparents, and Grandma was left on her own with no support, only able to see her son on visitation. And so it was. Grandpa never passed the bar exam, instead becoming a teacher and eventually a principal in the public school system. Tom Jr. became like a sixth child to the family, whose 5 children already occupied all the bedrooms in the house, leaving only a small closet space for Tom Jr. to have as his room. Grandma took on a career in retail credit, working for O'Malley's department store in New York City, a daily commute from her home in New Britain, which gave her a small income, but no chance for advancement. She remained there through the years as Tom Jr., her Tommy, was growing up in the O'Loughlin family. Grandma. Margaret Lawrence was a beautiful girl whose father, like Tom Sr.'s father, worked at the Colt Arms factory. Colt Arms was one of the principal businesses of Hartford, Connecticut, located on the Connecticut River, not far from the O'Loughlin's original Hartford residence, at 160 Main Street, where they maintained a saloon established around the turn of the century, as well as their residence. Grandma was vivacious and positive in her outlook, despite the loss of custody of her son. She was musical and eventually wrote dozens of songs, publishing some at her own expense and duly registering her copyrights as she marketed them to New York's music houses. Never successful, she was undeterred and made friends with a local musician who transcribed and arranged her tunes, as well as a neighboring poet whose anthology she treasured. During the war, she was active in the Ladies' Auxiliary, raising funds for the troops overseas. Grandma eventually married again to a sweet man named Francis Coakley, who was an army officer and pilot in the China-Burma India theater. He survived the war but was damaged from chemical exposure, the details of which remain unknown, but left him with emphysema. He spent most of his life as an invalid who could only rise from the bed for a few hours at a time, cared for by Grandma as she continued her career in New York City to earn an income for the family. Grandma and Frank bought a house in New Haven, closer to her work in New York, where they lived out their lives together. The O'Loughlin family. Tom Jr. thus became the youngest child in the O'Loughlin household. Paternal grandparents John and Catherine Delaney O'Loughlin had 5 children: Tom Sr., Uncle John, Aunt Bess, Uncle Henry, and the youngest, Catherine, who was just 6 years older than Tommy and became his close friend. Also in the family home lived Tommy's grandaunt, Liz, the sister of his grandmother. Aunt Liz ran the household with a firm hand. She would take charge of disciplining young Tommy, and he lived under her watchful eye and ready hand. Tommy was an unexpected addition to her responsibilities, and he would be raised under her strict supervision, not always kindly administered. It is not clear to me exactly who was the actual family decision maker. Nevertheless, the family, quote unquote, functioned as a unit, and the children were guided by family decisions, likely made in consultation with their priest, for this was a staunchly Catholic family who attended Mass together and followed the strict Catholic path of child raising. The children were expected to be good Catholics and to succeed. Thus, Tom Sr. was sent to Catholic University in Washington, D.C., the first in his line to go to college. When he failed the bar exam and lost his marriage, he lost the position of family scion to his brother, Uncle John. Uncle John attended 1 year at Columbia in New York City. He married the daughter of Hartford Mayor Richard Kinsella and worked for the Hartford Fire Insurance Company, where he spent his career, eventually retiring as a vice president. As the oldest responsible son, he was entrusted with mentoring Tom Jr., and a close relationship developed, as shown in the photograph, which I have in the book. I didn't know that Uncle John had a year at Columbia until I did some deep research, not maybe, just before I finished writing the book. And it explains so much. It explains the connection between Uncle John and the elites of, the financial world, which of course includes New York City and Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, Connecticut, well known to be the insurance capital of the world, or of the United States, I should say. Perhaps it still is, but the city is full of insurance company lawyers, and that was the path that they had laid out for my dad, who we call Tom Jr. in this part of the book. And so it was Uncle John who was somehow recruited to the Hartford Fire Insurance Company out of Columbia. He didn't complete this college there. And it was Uncle John who married into the Kinsella family. Now, the Kinsella family is a very important family in Hartford, Connecticut in the 20th century. The mayor at the time was Richard Kinsella, and his son, Richard, I think it's Richard Jr., also became the mayor of Hartford. And it's kind of a small town idea of when my grandfather was later in his career, he was teaching. He taught for a while at the Richard Kinsella School. So Richard Kinsella, the senior, the one that was the mayor in the 20s, his daughter, Pauline Kinsella, married my Uncle John, the one that became my dad's mentor. And since writing the book, I've started reading a lot of the writing of a man named David, named yeah, Livingstone. And this guy Livingstone says that there were a number of Jewish people that were kind of sent into Ireland and had their Jewish names modified a little bit to be an Irish name. Well, it turns out that this Kinsella family had not always been called Kinsella. It had been called Kingsley. And under the name Kingsley, they had a bakery and delivery service, Kingsley Bakery in Connecticut. This is the earlier generation. And of course, if you know the name Kingsley, you know that it is often is a Jewish name. And so to me, to change from Kingsley to Kinsella is to attract the Irish community that was growing, and the O'Loughlins were part of that in Hartford, Connecticut in the 19 teens and 20s. I have no idea whether Pauline Kinsella has any Jewish ancestry or not. I've not dug that far, but just an amazing thing to consider that possibly this Mayor Kinsella had been seated earlier in the 19th century as part of a uh, s- a kind of maybe subversive way to start controlling a community. Well, that's just me speculating. Let's get back to the book. Oh, I got to tell you one more thing about Pauline Kinsella. She was the wonderful, good person our in my father's extended family. She always, for each of us, she made a special Christmas stocking, and it was so beautifully knit with different colors and had all kinds of little dangling, you know, shiny objects on it and Christmas tree balls and things. It was just, they said, mine said John and my sister said Lisa, and uh, they were gorgeous. Those, and then although Uncle John refused to send us anything, probably reflecting what Bertrand Russell had to say in the beginning of the book about not fraternizing with his old accomplices or uh, old companions. Uh, Once my dad broke from Uncle John, he would not uh, send us anything, but Pauline always sent us a little check for Christmas. She was a good woman, and that was hard to find in my dad's family. I'll just leave it that way. My father's family of origin, when we visited them, they were just cold and unreachable, distant. Childhood. Born and raised in this environment, visitation with his beloved mother on alternate weekends became a happy respite from the strict O'Loughlin family and Aunt Liz. Tommy became devoted to his mother in a strong bond of sympathy and love. He wrote and sent her a postcard every day except Sundays for the rest of his life after he left home. From his mother, he learned the goodness of ordinary people, lovable but unfortunately poor folks, surviving the Depression with grit and humor. He became empathetic in a way that would shape his character strongly in favor of the less fortunate. And this strong sense of empathy would cause him to make choices in the future which would upset the plans laid for him by the family. Loomis School. Tom Jr. went to public school until graduation from the 8th grade at Southwest Elementary School in Hartford, Connecticut. Then an extraordinary event happened. He was awarded a scholarship to the elite Loomis School in Windsor, Connecticut. I do not know how this happened. I can only surmise that the impetus came from Uncle John, the mentor who was connected to the powerful families of Connecticut through his employment at the Hartford Insurance Company. Behind this looms a deeper question. Was Tom Jr. promised to these elites to be given a future within the elite establishment that would benefit Uncle John's employers? Or deeper still, was the family in financial difficulties due to their exposure to losing their home during the Depression? Difficulties that could be overcome by the pledge of a child to serve the needs of the establishment? Now, I'm going to stop because I wrote that, 4 years ago, and I was trying to just think of all the different reasons why my dad would have been shepherded into what really was a grooming operation to get these young, particularly talented young people to come into that elite class, which Bertrand Russell obviously belongs to and covets. Young people, as long as they will be compliant. And just like his father before him, my dad was just not going to be compliant. Well, he was until he just couldn't do it anymore, and that happened after his experience in World War II. So I don't think it was an indebtedness. I think that there was some type of understanding, probably involving both the church, which of course was why my grandfather went to Catholic University. Must have been some influence that their church had to particularly pick him out for the honor of going to Catholic, especially during World War I when everybody else was in the army. I mean, it just shocks me that my grandfather was in college in World War I when everybody else was in the army, in the trenches. But that was what they did. They sent him there, and when he was there, he played football. And he was apparently quite a football player. He did play some professional football after college for a while. And of course, that's my dad's, football playing had started as a child out in the public parks where he and all of his uncles would play football. So he was a pretty good ball player by the time he got to Loomis and was on the Loomis football team as well as subsequently Harvard. Tom attended Loomis as a day student, commuting from home by train. He was very active at Loomis, playing most team sports and participating in clubs such as chess and the bridge. He was also an editor of the school newspaper. His classmates were generally from established upper-class families, such as George P. Schultz, future Secretary of State, who was a rival in sports and was Tom's teammate on the football squad. Loomis, now Loomis Chaffee, has a list of exemplary alumni, including both John D. Rockefeller III and Winthrop Rockefeller. An honor student success at Loomis led to a full scholarship at Harvard, where he matriculated in 1937 as a member of the class of 1942. Harvard. Tom continued to succeed both academically and in athletics. A big man at 6'3" and 200 pounds, Tom played tackle on the Harvard varsity football team. He majored in English while joining the Reserve Officers Training Program as the Second World War erupted in Europe and the Pacific. Midshipman School. Tom entered the United States Navy Reserve Midshipman School at Columbia University in New York City upon graduating from Harvard in the spring of 1942. Records indicate he was injured in some way and had to leave the school during the summer for treatment. During his convalescence, Tom created a game based on his studies of naval warfare. He called the game Task Force. Task Force was a board game similar to, but more complex than Battleship. It may have been this game, or perhaps it was destiny, that upon his recovery he was accepted into the next class and appointed regimental commander of his class in the fall of 1942. And as a side note, I wrote in parentheses, it is interesting that the term task force was not adopted by the U.S. Navy until March of 1943, just as Tom was receiving his commission as an ensign. Did that young man's efforts get shared up the chain of command to Admiral King himself, who instituted the task force system? And of course, you know all the Task Force 53, Task Force this and that in 34, and the stories of all the naval battles of World War II involving task forces. Before he graduated, Tom had the duty of leading the midshipman regiment in marching and drill practice. One winter day, the 1,000 midshipmen led by Tom were marching through neighborhoods around Columbia in a snowstorm. Suddenly, a gang of neighborhood kids appeared and started throwing snowballs at the marchers. In the next block, even more kids were waiting and aimed their snowballs at the midshipmen, one of whom got hit in the eye. Upon seeing this, Tom turned to the midshipmen and commanded, "Parade, halt." The midshipmen stopped. Then, "Parade, break ranks and return fire." The midshipmen gleefully broke ranks and engaged the youths in a snowball fight. On the night of their graduation, a ceremony was held at the New York Yacht Club. It was February 13th, 1943. Among the guests was a delegation from the Royal Navy led by Admiral C.S. Holland of the Admiralty. Admiral Holland, past captain of the British aircraft carrier Ark Royal and veteran of the Mediterranean campaign, presented the newly commissioned Jhn OLoughlin with a ceremonial sword. It was given at a time when Britain's Navy was badly battered, and with the hope that the Americans would supply the naval forces the Allies would need to win the war. And I have a picture of Admiral Holland handing the sword to my dad. It was in the Hartford Courant newspaper, and I have one of the original copies of that photograph. That was in February of 1943. If anybody wants to go and look it up in the newspaper archives, February 13th, 1943, Hartford Courant. Following additional training in bomb disposal, firefighting, and, one suspects, our aerial surveillance photography, Jhn OLoughlin reported to San Francisco, California, where he joined the USS Nashville, Brooklyn-class light cruiser CL-43. The USS Nashville. The Nashville had already achieved many successes before Tom embarked. She had been one of the escorts on the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, which achieved the bombing of Tokyo at a time when the Japanese people and their military had thought it impossible. Lookouts on the Nashville spotted a Japanese patrol boat en route to Japan. Nashville's guns sank the patrol boat, but the assumption was made that the boat had notified the Japanese Navy that the Doolittle raid was approaching. So the raid was launched prematurely, with General Doolittle giving the order for the planes to take off. Low on fuel after bombing their targets, the planes ditched in China. Nearly all crews were recovered by friendly Chinese forces, but 2 flyers lost their lives. This was a propaganda triumph that rattled the Japanese and energized Americans everywhere to fight Tojo and avenge the victims of Bataan. MacArthur's troops left stranded in the Philippines, who fought a losing battle against overwhelming forces only to be led to prison camps on what history knows as the Bataan Death March. General Douglas MacArthur escaped to Australia and began planning his return to the Philippines from his headquarters in Brisbane. He would build a fleet of warships for the job, which became known as MacArthur's Navy. The Nashville was among them, and the young ensign Jhn OLoughlin was ready. From San Francisco to Pearl Harbor and from there to the theater of war, the Nashville steamed ahead. Tom had arrived at Mare Island near San Francisco in June 1943 to join the USS Nashville. The Nashville sailed back into the war on August 25, 1943, as part of Admiral Bull Halsey's Third Fleet, escorting aircraft carriers Yorktown and Essex to make an air raid on the Japanese airstrip on Marcus Island. Nashville and other warships provided a screen for the big carriers to operate from as they bombed the Japanese installations. A similar raid was launched October 3, 1943, on Wake Island. These carrier raids destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft as well as hangars, runways, and storage facilities. Following the Wake raid, Nashville returned to Pearl Harbor and from there to Espiritu Santo, the legendary tropical island in the New Hebrides, where a U.S. base had been constructed by Seabees early in the war. The famous Flying Tigers had a base there, and R&R was available for warriors of all the Allied services. Its tropical beauty provided the inspiration for James Michener's classic novel, South Pacific. Florida Island in the Solomons was Nashville's next destination. On Tulagi, the Navy had a base and a repair facility. From this base, the Nashville convoyed the U.S. Marines to Bougainville Island, where some of the toughest fighting in the Pacific would occur. Convoy duties continued through November 43, with Nashville arriving at Milne Bay, New Guinea, on November 27th. December 1943 was spent at Milne Bay at the extreme southeastern tip of the island of New Guinea. The Nashville and other warships were training with the new Higgins boats, actually many different configurations of these novel landing craft, to coordinate landings planned for the campaign to drive the Japanese out of New Guinea, where they threatened Port Moresby, a harbor from which they could attack Australia itself. Australians had fought the Japanese in New Guinea since their invasion, fending off attacks while vastly outnumbered and short of supplies. Australians and Americans worked together on land and sea, and Nashville joined HMAS Shropshire and HMAS Australia in combat missions supporting Allied troops engaged in jungle fighting. I'll stop and make a comment because when I went to Ireland back in 1995 to the first of what's been many happy O'Loughlin clan rallies or reunions, we met a man named Brendan O'Loughlin, who had been an admiral in the I'm sorry, not an admiral, an air marshal in the Australian Air Force. And he described as being a child during World War II and actually showed me and sent me a copy of these silhouettes that everybody was given to identify the friendly warships by their silhouette. And there was Shropshire there, and then another Australian ship, and the Nashville was there. And so when Brendan O'Loughlin read my book about Jhn OLoughlin, he sent me a note to tell me, I remember seeing this silhouette where we learned that the Nashville was there, one of the ships that was in Australia to help us fight the Japanese and keep from getting invaded by them. Another small world story. Higgins boats were the innovative craft designed by Marine Colonel Victor Krulak, who had seen the use of similar craft by the Japanese while he was stationed in China during the Sino-Japanese War in 1937. By the time of the New Guinea operations, various types of modified designs of these boats, actually large ships, were in use, such as the LCVP, the LCT, and others, developed for the efficient transport and delivery of men and material to shore via front opening ramps that could sail up onto the beach for quick unloading. Victor Krulak would have an illustrious career, rising to lieutenant general, and one day would be Tom's boss at the Joint Chiefs of Staff's Special Operations Headquarters, SACSA. SACSA was the office Krulak held in 1962 to 64 when Jhn OLoughlin was employed as planner of special operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Training and coordination between U.S. Army, Navy, Marines, and Australian counterparts was essential to the success of MacArthur's island hopping campaign. Previous amphibious landings under Third Fleet Command had been difficult and costly. MacArthur was determined to improve the landing procedures, and for this task he created MacArthur's Amphibious Force, part of the fleet now known as MacArthur's Navy. To command this new amphibious navy, he chose Rear Admiral Daniel Barbie, whose narrative of its operations he published in 1969 under the title MacArthur's Amphibious Navy. This volume has Admiral Barbie's personal observations and comments from his logs and is key to understanding the unique Navy unit created for General MacArthur, Commander-in-Chief of the Southwest Pacific area. The next few pages describe some more of the activities of the USS Nashville and how it became MacArthur's flagship. And I will just pass through some of that to get to an interesting event that is reported in the biography of Wild Bill Donovan. General William Donovan, the head of the OSS in the Second World War. So here's the story about that. We are now up to page 18. A visit from the OSS. Let me back up a little bit. On April 13th, 1944, Ensign Jhn OLoughlin was promoted to lieutenant, junior grade. On April 19th, 1944, at Humboldt Bay, New Guinea, General Douglas MacArthur embarked on the Nashville, making it his flagship for the next campaign. A visit from the OSS. On that same day, according to his biography, General William Wild Bill Donovan, spy master and creator of the OSS, paid a visit to General MacArthur on the Nashville. The visit's purpose was to obtain MacArthur's permission for the OSS to operate in his area, the Southwest Pacific area. The encounter is described in Wild Bill Donovan, the spy master who created the OSS and modern American espionage, by Douglas Waller, published Simon & Schuster in 2011. Here's a quote. On April 19th, Donovan boarded MacArthur's command ship, the USS Nashville cruiser, docked at Finishhaven on the Huon Peninsula, which the Americans held in southeast New Guinea. His briefcase bulged with memos and from advisors on how best to approach MacArthur, along with lists of gadgets from Lovell that might impress him. As the Nashville and the invasion convoy sailed circuitously to fool the Japanese, MacArthur, like an emperor on a galley, spent much of the next 2 days lounging on a deck chair outside his cabin, chatting with aides, snoozing, and signing autographs for crewmen brave enough to approach him. Between the stream of interruptions, Donovan made his pitch, unquote. MacArthur versus Donovan. The rivalry between these two Army generals was not new. The visit by Donovan to MacArthur in New Guinea in April 1944 was the last of many efforts by Donovan, who had been appointed by FDR to the post of Coordinator of Information before the war, and who had first approached MacArthur in 1941, even before Pearl Harbor, to obtain permission to operate in MacArthur's area. Donovan and MacArthur are both described as prima donnas, and that is certainly a huge part of their inability to work together. But a much deeper disagreement existed between them as to the value or lack thereof of secret operations forces generally, and their usefulness in actual wartime combat, where the theater commander needs complete control over whatever is happening in his command. This difference would frame the debate after the war ended as well, with the OSS disbanded, but Donovan and his personnel eager to continue their work as undercover agents in the post war period. When the CIA was established by President Truman in 1947, it was founded by Donovan and staffed with his loyalists. The dispute continued into the Cold War, with the CIA enjoying the support of Wall Street, the Eastern establishment, and, of course, its lawyers, such as John Foster Dulles and Alan Welsh Dulles, the Dulles brothers. Alan Dulles became the CIA director under Eisenhower, shunting Donovan aside, and John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State. Throughout the 1950s, the CIA would dominate U.S. foreign policy and run covert operations, subvert loyalties, overthrow foreign governments, and control resources of other countries for the benefit of their Wall Street clients. It was not the kind of war that MacArthur, the old soldier, approved of. Quote, "There are those in Washington who would rather see MacArthur lose a battle than America win a war," unquote. As MacArthur had said, and those forces would have Truman's ear as the post-war world took shape. And I think that's a good place to stop. Forgive me for a couple of glitches in my reading, and wow, getting my own mind wrapped around my dad's story again. I think it's just well, it's just wonderful to be able to share this, and with the confidence I have gained by sharing my dad's story and finding out that, yes, it really does fit with the actual history if we will dig deep enough to find the actual history. And I'm just so grateful for everybody that has supported me in the effort to write this book and to get this story out. And I can't name everybody, so I won't name anybody, but I think you know who I'm talking about. There's dozens and dozens of folks that supported me in getting this book written, doing the research, collecting the documents and the photographs. Well, it's just a wonderful, wonderful feeling to get this book, short as it is, it's only 75 pages, out into your hands so that we can think together about, what does my father's life tell us about what's wrong with America today, as well as what's right with it. And hopefully we'll have a clean future without this this conception of a ruling class, this conception of the elites, the idea that some animals are more important than others, as Orwell would put it, can finally be put to rest, and the system that our founding fathers put together can finally be put into practice without the obstruction of our important rights like voting, free speech, assembly, redress of grievances, religion, without interfering with our pursuit of happiness, which in my mind is the real goal of a happy nation, to allow everyone to develop who they are and pursue their happiness wherever they see it. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for being with me this morning here on McDuff Lives. And, check out the book if you haven't got a copy yet. I do appreciate everybody that buys a copy. It's just another way to get the word out to into more hands. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.